Good morning, Andrew Hewlett here, and I thought I would just put together a little video explaining some of the reasons why I believe fervently that there is a God, that God is real. And, from time to time I have people say to me, well, there's no evidence for God. It's all a fairy tale. It's sort of like the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus or something like that. It's really all just blind faith. And I just wanted to give a few of the reasons why I believe that there are good reasons to believe in God. There is evidence. These are not proofs as well. I think it's very difficult to sort of prove absolutely in some mathematical sense God's existence. But the key is, where does the evidence go? Is there rational evidence for believing in God? Where does the evidence lead? And so I'm hoping that you'll reflect upon that. This is basically a cumulative case as well. I'm just going to touch on a few very quick points. I could add to it experience. And maybe in the future I'll talk a little bit about that in another video or whatever. But I just thought for now I'd go with some of the basic building blocks for why I believe in God. One thing I wanted to point out as well is these are not just my own ideas. These are things I pulled from people like John Lennox, Oxford mathematician John Lennox, William Lane Craig, C.S. Lewis, and other people. So I'm not claiming these to be my own arguments or trains of thought. And I'm going to go very quickly here too. The first one is the mystery of existence. the mystery, the miracle, I would say, that we actually exist. And I believe that God is the best explanation for the existence of the universe, the world, and you and me as well. Why is there something rather than nothing? It's actually a very profound question that some people grapple with, but a lot of people, they found it too difficult, so they sort of put it on the back burner. But I think it's a very important question to grapple with. Why is there something rather than nothing? The best scientists believe that 13 billion years ago there was nothing, and the universe began to exist in a big bang. That things came into existence, and why is that? What would be the cause of that? Things don't just pop into existence like that for no reason. I believe the best explanation is that there had to be someone or something outside of this universe, something that's eternal and transcendent, something outside of this, in order that purposed to bring this into existence. There had to be some cause that was eternal and transcendent. So I think God fits into that really well. Also, too, people could say, well, perhaps there's a multiverse. There's sort of thoughts about that, although we don't have proof of that. But I don't think that really answers the question. How did it all get here? How could we get something from nothing? Other people have tried to, Stephen Hawking tried to invoke the whole idea of a quantum vacuum. But even there, the idea of getting nothing out of something, he has a very different definition of nothing. It seems nonsensical to be able to say that the universe could have caused itself before it existed. So I think the best explanation is that there is a creator, there is a God, transcendent God, eternal God, outside of time and space, who brought things into being. That makes sense. It's not a proof, but there's good evidence for that. Another point too would be the mystery of the fine tuning of the universe for bringing life into existence, of the universe and the world as well. cosmologists say that there's about half a dozen cosmological constants that are very finely tuned, and if they change by one little bit, there would be no possibility of life by any stretch of the imagination. For example, my understanding is the cosmological constant to do with the gravitational force in the expansion of the universe, that if it differed in one part in 1 times 10 to the 40th power, by one part in that incredibly huge number, the universe would have, on the one hand, collapsed in on itself into a big crunch, or if it was slightly, the gravitational force was slightly less, things would have just continued to expand, and there could be no formation of galaxies or star systems or anything at all that were necessary for life. So everything is incredibly finely tuned for the emergence of life. I got a quote here by Fred Hoyle, who an atheist, by the way, and this is what he says: "A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics, as well as chemistry and biology, and there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question." So that's Cambridge astrophysicist Fred Hoyle. Interesting too, Owen Gingerich, who's from the senior astronomer emeritus at the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, said, "Fred Hoyle and I differ on a lot of questions, but on this we agree. A common sense and a satisfying interpretation of our world suggests the designing hand of a super intelligence." That's from Owen Gingerich, who's a believing Christian and an astronomer as well. You could also add to this too, the not the macrocosm, but the microcosm as well. If you look at things like DNA, the incredible complexity of this. A number of years ago, one of the world's greatest atheists, Anthony Flew, passed away. But it's fascinating because he's probably the most well-known atheist in the world. I remember taking a philosophy course in first year university. He was right in there, had a number of places on why God does not exist. But after looking at the evidence from DNA, the incredible complexity of it, he came to the conclusion that he needed to reject his atheism, and he believed that there had to be a designer, a God. He never became a Christian, to the best of my knowledge. I don't know, it's possible. But he did come to the conclusion that there must have been an intelligent designer who did this. It couldn't have happened by chance. Now, there are other people too. I know that there's some people like the Dawkins, who said, well, yeah, 1 in 10 to the 40th power. Well, I guess we just got lucky. But it's too far-fetched. The numbers are astronomical. It would take far more faith to believe that than to go with something that just makes sense, that there was an intelligent designer who was able to do all this. So the mystery of the fine-tuning of the universe and the world for life, I think, powerfully points towards a divine origin. Another point too is the mystery of morals or morality, that we live in a moral universe. There's morals and there's meaning. And I believe the best explanation for that is that there is a God exists, that our morals, right and wrong, they flow from the character of God and God's commands. There's the well-known philosopher David Hume is famously said, you can't get an ought from an is. in a sense, you just from what's there, ethics don't flow to that. You can't get an ought from an is. Yet we know that we all have a moral compass that's sort of built within us. And for some, it's more finely tuned than others, and I think it can get out of whack. But believers and non-believers alike seem to have this moral compass in them. Whenever we have an argument or discussion, there's a sense that, one person is saying this, another person is saying that. We're maybe saying the other person is wrong, but ultimately, and C.S. Lewis pointed this out, what we're really saying is that person is not seeing the divine standard quite clearly. It presupposes that there is a standard. Otherwise, we couldn't have these kind of moral arguments at all. Naturalism doesn't provide a basis for objective moral truths. I think God is the best explanation for this, that our morals and that it's rooted in the character of God and the commands of God. And for people too, related to this is that we believe people have value. They're created in the image of God. It's hard to see how this could be just a product of evolution, because we believe, when we have an argument, we believe there's right and there's wrong. We don't just say it's just a cultural thing. I've got a couple of friends who are missionaries, Lori and Yoka, and they've worked, in India. They've worked for many, many years working with orphan kids in the garbage dumps of Manila. They work with AIDS orphans in Africa. And almost everybody would say, this is a good thing to do. This is a good and right thing to do. On the same token, everybody would say, too, for somebody to go to their neighbor and kill them and kill their children and take, steal their money and their possessions, we'd say, that's wrong. But why? But why is that? Is it just a feeling? Is there an objective basis for that? And it's really hard to see how that can be in a purely naturalistic way, because otherwise we're just a product of evolution, killing somebody and their kids and taking their possessions. That's survival of the fittest, So it's very difficult to see. Some people have tried to do this, but I believe it's very difficult to see how there can be this ultimate right and wrong without it being grounded in in God, in God's character and his purposes and his plan and his commands as well. There needs to be an objective basis for moral truth. Otherwise, we can't really have an argument. It's just a feeling, and it's no one's opinion is different than anybody else's. But we know that that's true because we say, no, that is wrong. So so those are a few things. Let's see. I'd like to go on and talk about some more in the future, but those are just a few things right now. The mystery of our existence, why there is something rather than nothing. The fine-tuning of the universe for life that just seems to be beyond comprehension, and also morality as well. So these things are mysteries. And I'm not saying that these are absolute proofs, but I believe the best explanation is that there is a God, that these things flow out of the existence of God. And I wanted to point out too that even though they're not proofs, that they're rational arguments. These are evidence-based arguments, and they point to the reasonableness of the God hypothesis. So to be able to say there's no evidence, just like the tooth fairy, that's not true. There is strong evidence. People may come up with different angles on this, but you can't just dismiss them as being, crazy or nonsensical. There's strong evidence that points to the existence of God. I'd like to sometime in the future to say, okay, what can we know about that God? Has this God come into history or impacted history? So that's another talk. But my hope is just to encourage your inquisitiveness, that you won't just say, that's just ridiculous. To be able to see that there's good evidence that points to God's existence, that there's far more going on than meets the eye. And modern science and quantum physics now points out that there's so much more going on than we can observe with our senses. And my encouragement is to develop and nurture that inquisitiveness and be open to the idea of God's existence. Anyway, that's all I have for now. Thank you for tuning in. Make a comment there if I post this up on the web. And I'll probably put some other videos together just for fun. Bye-bye and God bless.